Go. The birthplace of the Bohemian Revolution from Cowick 591 Studios. We are the Bohemian Reformation. This is the Steve Brown Arts Center Podcast Network with producer Blake Tempest.
Birthplace of the Bohemian Revolution from Cowick 591
Seems to be working very well.
Bohemian Reformation. This is...
There you go. Live technology.
Yes, sir.
Yes, it is.
This is the Steve Brown Arts Center Podcast Network with producer Blake Tempest and co-host Dale Reber. I'm Jim Gillespie, and this is the Jesup News for September 30th, 2024.
Whoa.
I know. We are sponsored by Mickey D's Pizza and Lobster. The Farrells are kind sponsors of this podcast, so make sure you visit their food truck wherever it is. Tonight we have our second live episode of our podcast, and it is special. We have the two candidates for Buchanan County Supervisor. The recorded version of this podcast will come out Monday, September 30th. We are going to talk to them about how they will be a help to our county. It is the hope of the Steve Brown Arts Center that we can offer a respectful discourse between the two candidates. Those candidates are Keith Wieland, the Republican candidate for Buchanan County Supervisor, and Rick Wulfekuhle, the Democratic candidate for Buchanan County Supervisor. The Steve Brown Arts Center is a 501c3 nonprofit organization that has a vision for artists, young and old alike, to have the opportunity to better themselves while helping to build the skills of those around them. The long-range vision is to house a rural artist residency program for professionals and emerging artists in all areas of the arts and the humanities. Artists will be offered accommodations in the studio space in exchange for a contribution of labor and maintenance of the buildings and grounds. So welcome, gentlemen.
Hey, thanks.
So, first off, we'll have you tell us a little bit about yourselves, and then Dale will start hitting you with hard-hitting questions.
All right.
People are used to that. Hard-hitting questions.
Hard-hitting questions, that's right. Keith, tell us a little bit about yourself, if you would.
Sure. My name is Keith Wieland. I grew up in Winthrop, Iowa. After graduating from East Buchanan, I went to Iowa State in civil engineering. Excuse me, figured out real quick I couldn't pay for college. So it took about 3 weeks to figure out how long that budget would last, and then figured out a way to work my way through it. Joined the Army actually 2 days after 9/11. It was a bit of a coincidence, but nevertheless, it looks really good on my records.
Yeah.
So joined the Army 2 days after 9/11. By then I was already working at the Iowa Department of Transportation. So at the Department of Transportation, I worked on superload analysis for bridges and structures. So any overweight vehicles that would want to travel our bridges, they would come by my office. And then we got into this whole conversation of GIS. So we got into a lot of databases and very high-tech information. We did 3D mapping of the state of Iowa. Then I moved into traffic and safety and all of those other organizations that really seem to matter as far as identifying what belongs in an intersection and conversations like that. All of that was going on at the same time I was trying to afford college. So I graduated in civil engineering from Iowa State and went around the job fair and found folks in the oil field that seemed to have a niche that I was curious about. Seemed to work out. I left Ames and worked in 7 countries and 18 states and worked all over for the oil field. So it was quite a run. Came back for a little bit and worked for the Iowa Utilities Board and did a lot of work for them and pipelines and things like this. And part of my exit strategy in getting out of the oil field was to get another degree. So I got another degree master's degree in legal studies in oil and gas from Oklahoma University. And so that got me a lot of knowledge and tools about property rights, about setting up leasing, about eminent domain conversations, and of course working for the utility board. I got into a lot of conversations about permitting for pipelines and wind turbines and conversations like this. Went back to the oil field for a couple of years. Well, excuse me, I did spend a few months in Union County. went through about 5 engineers before they decided that they needed an unlicensed me to see if they could help them out for a few months. They didn't like me either, so it seemed like they wanted to find about 6 or 7 engineers by that point. So went back to the oil field for a few more years, worked in a couple more countries and a few more states, and eventually moved back to Iowa. We moved back to Iowa because of the border issues. We had seen every day where we were collecting, literally, my wife would tell you, about 3 people or 4 people each day. And so those were illegal immigrants that were walking through our backyards. We're only a couple yards down from schools and playgrounds and things like that. And so after the shooting in Uvalde and we watched all of that transgress, we said, okay, something's going on. We need to do something more in our community. Obviously, we were still a part of the community, and then Texas came up with a law about how teachers could protect students. I said, oh, that's a really good idea. And sure enough, we decided to do it here in Iowa instead. So here I am back in Iowa. The plan was to actually teach. And I am substitute teaching at West Delaware, East Buchanan, Independence, and North Lynn. And here we are. Somebody said that they needed a Republican candidate for supervisor. Here's my introduction.
Well, thank you. Thank you. Rick, tell us a little bit about yourself.
You bet. Thank you. First of all, thank you for inviting us. This is a unique opportunity. It definitely is an honor to be here, and it's great for the people to be able to hear about us. Rick Wulfekuhle, for those that don't know me, I've been in this county my whole life. I've been too scared to move away, so I think my grassroots have always been here. We made a decision as a family. Honestly, I graduated high school in 1979, and the Rotarians were, I guess, unique enough at the time to select me as a Rotary Boy of the Year. And it was at that time that we really got interested in community effort and community involvement, and it was such an honor because I didn't think that, young farm kid growing up here and doing that. But everybody that has served, no matter what along the way, we have uniquely raised 3 boys. Our families have grown up here in Buchanan County. A couple of them had to move away for opportunities. Part of the reason I chose to run for supervisor, again, there's been a lot of underlying things that have gone with that. 30-year service member on the fire department here, basically leaving that as a role in assistant chief, and very rewarding, but again, not necessarily giving that up, still working with them under the emergency management pretense. The idea behind that is it's a younger person's game. Men and women that do serve and do that, it gets a little harder on the body and a little harder on the age to be able to do that, but extremely proud of that service and working with. Part of the reason coming into this too was the constant effort of our emergency management team in basically serving for and working with and training our local elected officials. What we do here as emergency management by Iowa code, we are governed by all the highest elected officials in the county. So I've spent a career in emergency management, a 24-year career, in teaching this role and teaching the role of the highest elected official, working with them. Since I've been in this role in 24 years, we've had 17 different presidential disaster declarations, to include all the little things that have went through. So we're no stranger to working with local, state, and federal government. We just have had a very successful career and a very successful run and a lot of great support. So this has been an extremely humbling experience up to this point. So anybody that runs, and I've put all of us out there in that, anybody that runs, we're putting ourselves out there, and it's hard on families, it's hard on everything that you go. It's quite a challenge, especially when we're all dealing with our family situations already and doing that, and it's just been an amazing run. But we appreciate this, and I guess my sincere desire to improve county government has brought us here.
Okay.
Well, thank you.
We see all around the county, there's one issue that I've seen everywhere in the county, and that's this EMS vote. And so I guess since you went first, I'll let you go first this time.
Please, yeah.
What are your thoughts on this EMS vote?
It is time. I think the Board of Supervisors made a great decision by putting that advisory board together, by passing the resolution that they did, making EMS an essential service. That was part of their delegation and their duty to do. So they picked a wonderful team. It's our EMS association, our local Buchanan County Association. So they're doing a great job of putting together a plan to be able to do this. It's hard sell when you're always talking about increasing things or paying for more, but I always call it that cost for service. That cost for service that is out there, we really don't want to see those services decrease, and those services need to be enhanced, and we're having trouble keeping volunteers. We're having trouble with that, so I really support what the current board did. I hope that this passes, because there's going to have to be a whole nother conversation, a hard conversation, if it doesn't pass. So I am in favor, and we want to support all those locals to keep their programs.
Okay.
It seems like an uniquely appropriate question for the first question, because the EMS services were supposed to be funded from your budget, actually. So that is one of the funding sources that it could have, these things actually could have come from. So I think a lot of people ask the questions when you have, looks almost like a used car lot out in front of your building, this brand new building that you folks have built. You've spent a lot of money on this building, which went way over budget. You have a lot of new toys and a lot of new gadgets out there, and we have a lot of folks asking for funding. And we're not getting a lot of transparency as far as where that funding has come from. I agree. These folks need the funding. And I'm not convinced that we took the right path to get here.
And that funding was decided by the Emergency Management Commission, along with the Board of Supervisors. That funding that talking about the American Rescue Act, the ARPA funding that come through, was physically put together primarily for the COVID funding and put together to build the public health program. We were fortunate enough to be able to tag into that, along with our assistant in the office that was able to get secure funding from Congress through the Hinson grant that got it. So that funding is all out there, and again, the transparency is there. But I definitely agree. I wished we could build a system that would be a Department of Public Service, if you will, or something like that for Buchanan County. Right now, it's again, the ambulance service, the EMS service is provided as a contract service, with the exception of Jesup and Fairbank, and they do a wonderful job of supporting theirs. So we do need to be more efficient. We do need to, and that's what, again, part of our duties will be more efficient, and obviously that transparency is huge.
So in the case of Independence, they have now a need for a water treatment plant. And everyone was saying, what did you do to plan for this? Seems to be the underlying question that people are asking. And over the last 2-3 years, what have I seen for the emergency management budget? How much did you folks spend over the last 3 years?
Over the last 3 years?
I mean, I see at least $3 million.
It's not in emergency management.
Okay.
Not in emergency
So
management.
is that the infrastructure, the capital infrastructure gains that you've also spent money on?
Some of it is, plus it's the 911 monies.
Okay.
So you look at, there's surcharge monies that go into the 911 system, which is, again, is a whole different pool. That also can be put under an emergency management umbrella.
Mm-hmm.
We don't do that in Buchanan County.
So how much did we spend on this public health building?
Close to $750,000, I believe, is close to the end ticket. All told, if you include all three services, because we have public health, emergency management, and Buchanan County Sheriff.
Okay.
Okay.
So it sounds like we've spent a lot of money that we haven't used to prepare for this next levy.
Potentially on that, but again, that was up to the Board of Supervisors at the time, and the ARPA funding and contract services for EMS.
Okay.
So are you saying you don't think maybe the levy's the way to go, or?
Well, I'm not saying that
Oh,
at all. That's entirely up to the people. That's
Yeah.
going to take a 60% vote from the people. That's not my place to say. What my place is to say is, what have we done to get here? Because we don't, as elected officials, as potentially elected officials, we have 3, maybe 5 different options. We have whether or not the people want us to use that EMS levy, which takes 60% of the vote. If they don't want us, that's option number 2. as elected officials or potential elected officials, we also have the responsibility to look at our existing spending and identify whether or not our existing spending could have covered that to begin with, or if we need to right the ship in the future. If I have no problem writing a ship, I have no problem starting up a business. That's not a problem. The fifth option, of course, is to do nothing, to let the private sector actually take care of it. That's not up to us. This is already at a levy point, so the folks need to let us know if they want me to start another business. Not a problem. I'm happy to do it, but they need to let us know what they want done.
Okay. There's been a lot of talk in the last several years about bridges in Buchanan County, and there's quite a few of them that are in danger of collapsing, I guess, at one time or another in the next several years. Is there something built into the present Board of Supervisors budget to slowly but surely get after these bridges, or is there a plan to take care of this?
I can tell you what I know if you want him to go first.
Sure. I've worked with Brian Carleber, I don't know, 25 years now. So, yeah, I've got a pretty good idea of how blessed we are to actually have Brian Carleber. You wouldn't believe.
And what is his position?
He's the county engineer.
Okay.
So you wouldn't believe how many talents and just, I mean, the way that this guy thinks, it's something beyond we have to measure. It is absolutely astounding the way that he's been able to support our system. As an assistant county engineer, a managing county assistant engineer for another county, I can tell you I've looked at all of those different counties and identified how many bridges they need to replace as well. Brian is ahead of the curve. When I was in Union County, I wrote a letter to Governor Reynolds, actually. She said that she had saved $5 billion and she had a $5 billion surplus. And I said, okay, would you mind sending that to the bridges and the infrastructure? And so we sent that on. And sure enough, I can't remember what the state representative down there was, but of course she put that into the Infrastructure Act. Under President Trump, that was a great idea. Under President Biden, it's still a great idea. Unfortunately, they tended to tag a lot of DEI initiatives onto that infrastructure bill as well. So that starts to get into the partisan conversation about what is it that we're actually trying to accomplish. Are we trying to replace these bridges? I'm a civil engineer. This is the reason I got into civil engineering. I knew that the Eisenhower highway system would expire about the time I got out of college. We saw T21, we saw T22 come through, and we saw all of those fundings through. I worked for the Bridges and Structures office when we started transferring jurisdictions to the counties. And so they actually transferred those bridges down to the counties that were deficient. And so we do have this problem, and that is one of the absolute necessities that we have. We have to respond to the safety of our public. We have to be able to allow our farmers to get their crops safely to market. That is our basic function.
Okay.
Agree. The farm to market is one of the bigger things, and we've got to make sure those deficiencies are addressed. Brian, I again agree with Brian. I've worked with Brian for the same amount of years here, and he's just been stellar to work with, especially in times of disaster, because then he's going to be the first one to go after that federal funding, and that is something that we've helped with over the years and make sure we do. That is probably the only time that we go out of priority sometimes, is if something gets damaged in an infrastructure-wise out of that area or out of that tenancy. But he's got a pretty good plan put together on what that infrastructure is. But again, the cost of everything does climb. The cost of road graders, the cost of maintenance, the cost of doing everything. So not a lot of stuff has to be contracted, but some of the stuff he does have to contract. So we do have to watch that. But the road use tax dollars are a different subset of what we have to work with, and Brian does a great job with that. But that will continue to be part of an elected official's responsibility. Part of the supervisor's responsibility is just as was mentioned. We have to make sure the public safety and the roads are capable of taking on these new challenges. Bigger equipment, semis, all the above.
Yeah.
I want to throw something more at you. More money. I want more money here. Recently there was a terrible accident in Blackhawk County, not far from us, at the Dunkerton corner there, where a Union student was killed. And there's a couple bad intersections in Buchanan County. What are your thoughts on perhaps roundabouts to protect our our citizens in our county when it comes to those bad intersections. You know, stop signs mean stop, but everybody doesn't read stop the same way, unfortunately.
Well, currently on this accident that you just spoke of, along with every accident that does happen in the county, there's an assessment that's done after that, kind of an after-action assessment, if you will, and we get together with law enforcement. They get together, I should say, with the Board of Supervisors and the county engineer and or whoever's involved. In this case, it was Blackhawk County, but you're right, we have had those, and we look at those studies, and it depends on the jurisdiction. You know, we have to understand our role too. Sometimes the Board of Supervisors don't have a lot to say on it if it's US Highway 150. In this case, it's not. It's a county blacktop that's been brought back. So they are discussing it. I don't know where they're at in it. It's kind of in its infancy, if you will, on this particular one, but we look at those studies absolutely every time. We need to look at those studies every time, not only if a life is lost, but when an accident happens, but it's especially tragic when a life is lost.
So in this case, and it sounds like we lost a heck of a football player, and that's very sad as well. So I worked for traffic and safety at the DOT, so we were part of that process. I tended to build the infrastructure assets, signs, lights, signals, but the fella next to me, Dr. Michael Palovich, was the actual guy who built those crash analysis and crash reporting software, and it's his software that's actually in these patrol cars. So what we have as a state, what happened after that was Iowa, Dr. Michael Palovich put together this tool called ICAT, Iowa Crash and Analysis Tool, ICAT. So you can go on to Iowa DOT's website, you can look for ICAT, and you can look at the individual intersections and identify it to yourself. If you think that there's a problem, bring it up to Brian. But obviously in this case, this is outside of our jurisdiction, so
Well, we haven't
it's
been
still
all
very
over
sad.
the county, but we were thinking about C-57 and Amish Boulevard.
Okay.
There's
Yeah.
tons of traffic and a lot of slow-moving vehicles, and there's school on the corner.
The
and
auction
then
hall is
and
right
the auction
there.
hall is on the other corner.
right.
And when we heard about this accident out here, we were talking about roundabouts, how roundabouts probably would have saved that a roundabout there would probably be a wise thing to do
So
ahead of the curve instead of waiting for an accident to happen. And I guess I have heard there have been some accidents out there, but
Sure.
yeah.
So there's about, I think it's about 35 different warrants. There's about 35 different recipes to put out a stop sign. And so there's a different recipe, obviously, for roundabouts as well. In my experience, roundabouts work very well. Truck drivers tend to not like them because it makes it very difficult
Sure.
for them to make those curves.
Yeah.
And so we have to be very cognizant. I remember the first roundabout in Iowa was in Oskaloosa, and I just happened to be in traffic engineering at that point when at the university. And the 16 or 17-year-old girl drove into the roundabout and went right over the edge because they didn't build the roundabout correct. What they did was they put bike trails underneath the roundabout. It was an architecture group rather than an engineering group that built this roundabout. So there was a 12-foot drop, and she went right over the edge of it. Roundabouts have to be designed the right way, and we have to have the right recipe, and we have to have the right place for it.
Well, the trucks make it around the one just south of Fairbank, and so
Yeah.
you would think one of similar size would fit in there probably.
Yes, sir.
and this sort of
That's
thing.
right.
Well, we're talking about roads. Have you ever thought about paving the road out to this Jesup Cemetery? It's a real dust bowl in the summertime, and for funerals and that sort of thing. It doesn't make a very good impression on anybody that happens to be.
Is it county or is it city? At
Oh,
this
it's
point?
county.
It's county.
It'd be
Okay.
the city is paved or seal coated to the city limits, and there's about 8/10 of a mile then out to the cemetery. So
So the seal coat isn't holding up, or is it too much
it's
traffic?
It's just a rock road.
Okay.
See, and it's just dust. And
Yeah.
I was with a group of people. We were putting flags up all the way to the cemetery for Memorial Day and this sort of thing. And cars go by. Even they were going slowly because they saw what we were doing. But still, the clouds of dust is just horrible. And so, anyway, since you're here in Jesup, we thought, well, it'd be nice if we did something nice for Jesup.
Well, and I will say that did come up in one of the speaking engagements that I did have, and it wasn't anybody in this room, so it was funny. It did come up in conversation, and we would look at it, but we'd have to look at it with the study and see what options there would be. I love the word recipe. Recipe is a good word for it because that's, I mean, you got to look at all the options and stuff. But
Yeah.
it wouldn't be off the radar, farm to market.
So do you have to get it on a list, or?
So yes, that Brian has a 5-year plan that works out 5 years in advance, and so his 5-year plan is out on the DOT website. I believe the county actually puts it on their website as well.
Yep.
So that 5-year plan is out there. If you folks believe that that is something that should be paved, then reach out. But
Okay. Well, I noticed in the budget, if I read it right, that roads and transportation went up 11.05%. And so I was wondering if any of that money is going to bridges, or is that go to
Absolutely.
paved
Yeah, so-
roads and this
All
sort
the
of
above.
Yeah, and that's why the increase.
Right.
Like a
So we are
11%.
at that crux in our bridges and structures life. If we don't make hard changes about building and rebuilding these bridges, we're not going to keep up.
Yeah.
I
okay.
promise you, we are
Okay.
not going to keep up.
Okay. Also, in Buchanan County, and this is all of Iowa, but it says that we're the second highest cancer rate and the leading new cancers, and a lot of that they're thinking comes from water.
Okay.
And as I noticed, there's in the minutes where the Board of Supervisors had to approve manure plans. Does that have to do with the purity of the water? Is there anything the county can do? Because I know a lot of the state regulations keep you from doing what you want to do.
I would say that's part of it. The manure management plans that are required by not only DNR but our locals, they have to be on file.
Can you
And-
tell me just what that is real briefly?
Yeah, the manure management plans is every operation that is applying manure out in the fields, whether it be, they have to have a management plan to be able to apply that. So they have to have a sign off on a farmer. It might be a contract with another farmer.
So you need so much land if you have so much
So
manure.
much land for so many head of hogs.
Okay,
Yep, that's
all right.
exactly the way. That's exactly the way that works. So
Okay.
as long as that's on file and they're following that, that's part of it. But honestly, that's probably a smaller portion of it. What's probably more important is the watershed authorities. And we have 3 very distinctive watershed authorities in Buchanan County that we manage, that are part of, and I happen to belong to all 3 just because of, part of that is because of that position, and that comes with sampling, management practice, and doing that. And you're seeing a lot more programs with CRP and a lot of those programs in there, and that's another thing. We need to look at our land use plan and on a more regular basis and pay attention to that. But our watershed authorities are the Cedar, the Wapsipinicon, which is the biggest watershed that we have, and then the Wulfekuhle over on the east side, so from west to east. So we're heavily involved with that. We have a board member that's involved with all 3 watersheds as well, so they pay attention to that along with local leadership. And Jesup, you've got a great water plan because some of your subset water comes on that northern tier, and actually your people, we come to quite a few meetings over here, and they did that. So that's posted, I think, not only, it might not be posted on your website, but I know it's posted on Intercogs. It's on your council government website, the Jesup water plan. So that's how it's managed through the board.
So do you think it is farm runoff that's causing most of the
It's
problems?
a combination.
Yeah.
It's a combination of the above. I wouldn't say I would defer anything medically inclined, obviously.
No,
to our
that doesn't
public
make
health
sense.
Yeah,
Right.
sure.
Yeah,
Right.
that's not anything the board can be, but we work hand in hand with them. So that is definitely, it's always a concern when you've got medical tendencies that possibly come out of communities. So we look at all of it.
Yeah.
There
Okay,
was,
good.
a few years ago, I actually took over a Facebook page about kayaking. I said, "Oh my goodness, kayaking is so big in Oklahoma. Why isn't it big in Iowa? It should be great here." And so that's one of the reasons that I took over that was, number one, to get folks out and active. Number two, if they're thinking about our waterways, then they're thinking about clean water and clean activities. So that's one thing that we've noticed is that it seems like we could do more about soil conservation. If we can keep that soil from running off, then we'd be able to keep those minerals in our fields as well. So we're going to be able to see healthier fish, we're going to see healthier wildlife, we're going to be able to see deeper streams so that the fish can grow up healthier. We're going to see more recreation, which is exactly what Buchanan County is trying to do. We're trying to increase our tourism in this area. We have, like you said, we have wonderful water reservoirs in this area. So it would be wonderful if we could see more conservation efforts, but again, of course, that would have to be a volunteer effort. It's kind of like the sidewalk conversation. When I was a child, everybody built their own sidewalk. That's what we did. Now everybody wants to kind of defer this off to some other conversation. So obviously having a background in lumber and timber and things like that, actually it was Orland Love who suggested, why don't we plant more trees near our streams and waterways? How can we control our runoff better? And maybe this is the conversation. Does it have anything to do with cancer? I'm not that guy. I'm not going to be able to go that direction. Okay. But I do see, especially as an avid kayaker, I love to kayak, but I don't see many boats out there. And that kind of concerned me. That kind of flagged me right away because the fishermen are not getting out there. And so that makes me wonder why they weren't getting out there. And sure enough, I sure did start to see lower and lower depths of the water. The dams haven't changed their elevation any. It's the thickness of the streams that changed. Mm-hmm. So in Mr. Love's conversation, he says, you know what? If you take care of the runoff, the streams are going to take care of themselves. So maybe this is the way forward. Maybe we can help folks not only through tourism, not only through ecology, not only the general health of our environment. Maybe this is a step forward. There's more conservation in this area.
Well, speaking of ecology, I'm interested where you gentlemen stand on wind turbines in our area. There's been talk of building some in our area. Keith, we'll start with you. What are your thoughts on wind turbines in Buchanan County?
Sure. So obviously working at the Utilities Board for 3 years as a utilities regulation engineer, these are conversations that we had regular access to. In some cases, so we started to see a decline in pipeline permits. And what we did see was a 300% gain in electric permits, so electric transmission line permits. And so what tended to happen was I said, well, Iowa's not growing 3 times as fast. What's happening here? Well, sure enough, they started talking about selling energy created in Iowa to the Chicago market. So their idea was to funnel all the electricity, raise up the voltage, and make it more efficient to have a direct voltage. So instead of alternating voltage, which would go to your house, they wanted to make it more efficient to transmit that electricity to the Chicago markets. Yeah, it's kind of one of those not in my backyard conversations, right? So you have to decide whether or not you want to be an industry that's supporting the expansion of Chicago, or if you want to be an industry that's supporting yourself. Yes, wind turbines are helpful, they are useful, they do have practical applications. I think that one of the great changes that they made to that ordinance is to say if you wanted to create a wind turbine for your farm yourself and then support your neighbor as well, fantastic. That makes sense to me. That seems like a great process. But these industrial sized wind turbines, when they set up, they say, oh no, we won't use eminent domain. No, that's absolutely true. The wind turbine itself will not use eminent domain. What happens is the company that transmits that electricity uses eminent domain to take over somebody else's property. And that's where I kind of get a little fuzzy. So if folks want to have that opportunity to do that themselves, that's great. You take advantage of your resources. But as soon as you start imposing your will on somebody else, that's where you need to step back and say, how important is this to me? Do I need to take my neighbor's property to be able to make a buck? That seems like the fair question.
Yep, and that's the research that the current Board of Supervisors did by going with the Board of Adjustments and Planning and Zoning. They looked at just those issues. How does it go into the neighbors, and how does it bother that situation? Again, keeping it in. Do we need to look at alternate energy? Absolutely. Every day that we're in this, but the Board of Supervisors again goes to their powers to be, their boards that they put in place. Board of Adjustments, they did those studies and they did their research and their work and brought that back. And yes, it was a little bit contentious along the way, but I like the decision that they went with, and I like how they got there. Was it for everybody? Do we want to make those decisions? And I will go out, I will put myself out there. I'll never be in favor of eminent domain. That should never be. We need to let our people decide what they do with their stuff. But yes, that's another reason we need to keep on top of our public plan, our land use plan, and make sure we're paying attention to that, because all these changes that are being made, all these CRP acres, all these watersheds that are put out there, our land values do change, and we need to keep looking at that. Plus then that looks at the taxation piece, and you mentioned the pipeline piece, the taxation piece of what that does bring in, and we have to pay attention to that too. So anytime we can bring tax base in, that's helpful.
Cool.
We've got to make sure we're not causing problems.
Okay, if you don't mind, I'll tag on. Okay, so one of the issues that I see that we didn't go far enough is that the state of Iowa only requires a $250,000 bond to tear down one of those wind turbines. $250,000 will probably get a crane out here, and it won't do much more. The folks down in Mechanicsville in Iowa, they have 2 turbines on their property, and both got struck by lightning. 3 lightning strikes on 2 turbines, and they are having fits. It is absolutely insane. So that's one aspect where my background kind of kicks in a little more. Being in the military, what I did was I worked as a paralegal. I did legal assistance and I did criminal law. And I understand the difference between a punitive measure and a non-punitive measure. Now, what we set out is a misdemeanor. So if the same thing happened in Mechanicsville that happened in Winthrop or Independence or Jesup or something of the sort, that's only a misdemeanor. There's no teeth to that conversation. We did not go far enough. So $250,000 isn't enough to clean it up. We have no recourse except a misdemeanor, a slap on the wrist to be able to go through this.
Oh, to the person who owns the...
To the person who owns the windmill.
Yeah,
Yes, sir,
okay.
which is a nameless corporation. So how weighty is that kind of conversation going to go? Also, in the respect of the TIF conversation, when I worked for Union County, they had wind turbines already in development. They had them already in place. They had already been in place for 3 years. What they needed was an engineer to come back through and make a plan for the next 20 years and say, this is how many bridges that need replaced. This is how many signs need replaced. This is how much gravel that needs replaced over the next 20 years. And so that's what I did, was I created a 20-year budget for that entire TIF district. And why is it 20 years? Well, you only can tax that organization for 20 years. After that 20 years, it's on the county. It's on the taxpayers. So I'm in disagreement with my friend here where I say any revenue is good revenue, because I don't believe that TIF conversation is a good revenue. I think that's a limitation on what we're setting ourselves up for.
Speaking of nameless corporations, is much of Buchanan County farmland owned by corporations, or?
I guess I never got into that conversation.
I
Do
don't,
you know?
I don't know the answer to that.
Yeah.
Okay.
I don't. We're seeing more of that happening.
Montana and Canada I've seen,
Yeah,
but I
yeah.
don't know about Buchanan County.
And there's some, religious organizations that are coming in and they're purchasing some ground and land. And I don't know the paradigm shift
Okay.
between the two, but
Okay.
it
What a
seemed
great
to have-
question.
Yeah, yeah.
Thanks
It
for
seemed
that.
to have driven the land prices a little up here, but I don't know now.
Yeah, we should have had the Montana and Wyoming outsiders coming in and buying up land and
Yes,
building.
sir.
it's
That'd be a great
messed up.
question to put
But-
back to our assessors. We'll
Yeah.
leave that back.
Yeah.
But, yeah. And there's
Go
the
ahead.
federal people are talking about China owning land, and they're buying land near military bases and this sort of thing. And we don't have anything like that, but I just wonder if there were corporations. They would say the farmers farm the land and corporations mine the land. They just take out until it's not worth anything. And
So I worked in the oil field in 16 states, as I mentioned, and Montana, Wyoming, and North Dakota were among those states. And so we would see those purchases go through. And so it was a little disturbing as well. We would start to say, okay, do we really need this client? Is this client somebody that we want to support? So yes, you're right to worry about these conversations, but I don't know the answer locally.
Okay.
This is the Steve Brown Arts Center podcast network. We're with Keith Wieland, excuse me, and Rick Wulfekuhle, and we're having a nice discourse about the Buchanan County supervisor position. We're here with producer Blake Tempest and co-host Dale Reber. I saw Rick that you talked. I saw an article about you, and you talked about the 5-year plan. And Keith, you mentioned that the supervisor's 5-year plan as well. Rick, we'll start with you this time. What would you add to the 5-year plan of Buchanan County?
Adding to the 5-year plan, and part of what was discussed earlier was the transparency, making sure that, especially as we come into this and we'll be inheriting a budget, making sure that we educate. And we need to educate all the citizens what their cost for services are getting for them. And we used to do a nice breakdown of where that all went to include the county road use tax dollars. And that needs to be shown out there because that's probably the most misunderstood one. Again, we've got a great county engineer doing great things, but to make sure we're looking at that and all the buildings and as we'd mentioned earlier, plus what grant dollars have been brought in and what grant dollars have done for us. We've done a great job of the different departments writing grants and getting this money, being able to bring in there. It's money that's out there. It's already cost the citizen, the taxpayer dollars anyway. We might as well bring it back to Buchanan County. And we hope we can build those systems. So that's part of my 5-year plan. And then the other part is our greatest resource. We need to do an assessment with our department heads and our elected officials to make sure we're giving them the resources that they need to be able to do the best that they can do and make sure we're supporting them in a way that that they need. Sometimes I think we get so caught up and so busy in our own lives we kind of forget about our most important resources, and that's really truly our department heads and elected officials. So a lot of programs in Buchanan County. We want to continue to support that. Not only do I want to keep our people here, I'd like to bring them back.
Yeah, that's a great point. There's this whole use or lose mentality. When I worked at the Department of Transportation, they said, well, if you don't spend your money this year, then you're not going to be able to get a 5 or 10% budget increase next year. Yeah. It just doesn't make sense. No, we need to remove that philosophy. As Rick said, he's got a great idea. We need to go back to the departments and heads and say, okay, what's your 2-year, what's your 3-year, what's your 5-year plan? You're not going to have the same large, obstinate budget, massive budget every single stinking year. That doesn't make sense. There's gonna be down years, there's gonna be up years. And we as supervisors or potential supervisors need to be able to see that in advance and say, okay, we know that we have an exceptional number of vehicles that are expiring in the next 2 years. We can see that coming. And I'm not convinced that we are doing that right now, and I agree with you, Rick, on that conversation. But what I do disagree with you is about adding to the budget. That's been my contention, is that we do continue to add to the budget and it never seems to alleviate. So we need to start cutting back, in my perspective. I've run a bare bones organization. I've run a bare bones small business for the last 17 years. Never had any concerns with it. I've got clients that have stayed with me for 14 years. They seem to enjoy what they're doing. I don't think that we as a government organization need to continually expand. That doesn't make sense to me. We should fund the bare bones. We need to be able to cut back and start cutting expenditures out of our budget.
Well, I could add one point to that because I like that concept and that thought, and that's why within that 5-year plan I talk about educate. For sure I want to start with the Highway 20 corridor, but we've got 3 great communities, and I think from north to south we could probably draw, but I want to do community meetings, kind of like what they're doing with this EMS, but we've got great libraries in Winthrop, Independence, and Jesup, and I think we owe the public, we owe the citizens to be able to educate that and see what our public wants and make sure we're doing the right thing for our citizens.
One thing I've always thought about was the mowing of ditches.
Yes, sir.
The county ditches, and it just seems to me like that's. And I think, well, maybe they need work for these guys to do, so they'll be here to plow the snow in the winter and that sort of thing. But there was a movement one time to plant the ditches with native wildflowers and this sort of thing, and not do so much mowing. Which would be one way of cutting expenses if there was other things those guys could do. I don't know.
He's already 7 years ahead of us on this conversation. So if you notice, we had a neighbor move in. I can't remember what state he moved in from, but I said, "Is this yours or is this the county's section?" And he says, "You mean that batch of weeds there?" I'm like, "Actually, it's not a batch of weeds.
Yeah.
These are natural wildflowers to Iowa." And he didn't know. He
Sure.
just moved into Iowa,
Yeah.
and that makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
But so Brian has done these things, and so what he's done is he's replaced all of those grasses with the natural grasses and the natural flowers of Iowa. And a part of that we see the benefit from already is the pheasant population. The pheasant population is great. It's so healthy. It's so vibrant now. And so what you're seeing that these folks do, and they still do have to hire additional individuals, part-time individuals every summer to actually mow, because we use our valuable resources to actually build the bridges and rebuild the roads and things like that. So it makes sense that we hire those temporary part-time individuals to typically mow the front half of the ditch. And that allows people to see down into the ditch better. If there was actually an accident, which I'm sure you've seen in EMS and things like that, it makes that visibility better. But on the back side of the ditches, he's already 7 years
Can
ahead
you
of
think
us.
of other things maybe that we're doing that we don't need to be doing, that would be revenue saving, or?
I'll add one thing to the ditch piece too.
Okay.
By doing the wildflowers and all that, we talked about water quality earlier, that keeps the rain where it lands.
Oh, yeah.
Yes,
So
sir.
rather than just running down and off into the waterways, it's keeping it there. So that's another benefit to that too.
Okay.
No, and that gets back to the department heads to come back and say, what is your absolute necessary bare bones expenditures?
Yeah, and that's the supervisors that would have to do that, right?
Yes, sir. That's where we go back to them and say, okay, I see I think we mentioned earlier, you can never blame payroll. We have wonderful, talented, amazing people, and that's never
Yeah.
a goal. Nobody would ever cut the people. That's not the role. But as we start to see those people as they resign, as they retire, I think it's time to look at that point right there and say, okay, what services are we providing to the public, and what are beyond what our legal requirement is to do? And let's do a study at that point to say, okay, let's figure out, do we need to be doing this? Are we competing against somebody in the private sector already? Are we doing something worse than is already being done in the private sector? That is the ideal, most opportune time when a person goes ahead and leaves for whatever reason. They find a better job. God help us. We don't want to lose anybody. We have such wonderful people here. But as there is a natural attrition, and as we start to see those positions resign and retire. By the way, weren't you going to retire about 4 years ago?
I started that process.
Okay, I thought you had. Okay, that kind of reminds me. Okay, thanks for that. So as we start to see people resign, I think we need to look at those roles and those actual responsibilities and marry the two up. If there is a public need, if we have a need in Buchanan County, absolutely, we need to follow through with it.
And that would be our job as local supervisors, rather than letting that happen and let the state dictate what we do. We need to do it locally.
Yes, sir.
And this comes from a man I talked to many years ago. The Board of Supervisors was a $25 million budget, and there's 3 people. So I look, and most of the smaller counties around us have 3 people on the Board of Supervisors, but Grundy has 5 people, but Dubuque only has 3, which is kind of strange. But is 3 people enough
Absolutely.
to handle that much money?
It is. I feel it is.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah. In fact, I feel the salary is a little high, actually. When I saw the salary was, 70, 75, something like that? Seems like it should be about 50 in my perspective.
Well, I saw
For
where
our
July
board-
1st,
Our board's not set.
For our
No.
supervisor. What is our...
July 1st, 2023, it became 48,150. Now, I don't know what it became July 1st, 2024.
Yeah.
And I saw another place that 54,000 a year was kind of,
Yeah, okay, 50
In the
seems
area.
about right. For
Yeah.
You might be talking too, there's benefits involved.
Oh,
Well,
that's
sure.
a
Might be
great
the total-
point.
might be the total
Yeah.
side of it.
yeah,
That's a
yeah,
great
total
point.
compensation, yeah.
Correct.
Very much, okay. So I just wonder about that. Okay, I don't have a whole lot left. Use of land in Buchanan County, most of course, is farmland. How much of it are you willing to give up for industry, or do you see a need for Buchanan County to have industrial jobs in the county, or is it enough that we have Cedar Rapids and Waterloo and this around and keep Buchanan County as farmland and small towns and this sort of thing? Or what do you see as the future of the county? Or
That's a great question, because that is a constant assessment, and that's where we tie ourselves at the hip to economic development. We tie ourselves at the hip again with education. We need to listen to our citizens. We need to listen to those business opportunities that are coming. We've got some great businesses and small communities. We've got just awesome opportunities, but if we don't continue to look at that, especially when they're looking at expanding, we'll never bring people back or keep people here. So that's really truly what we have to look at. How much are we willing to give up? I'm not willing to give up any of it if we can expand in place, but sometimes that's just not possible. You see by attrition some of the expansion to some communities, but it really has to be looked at and assessed by communities. Those highest elected officials need to pay attention to that. We do need to continue to look at our land use plan. Land use and management is a huge piece, again, with all the things that are changing.
I think that's where we differentiate. You just described tying ourselves at the hip with economic development. I don't believe that that's the function of government. I believe the function of government is to be a recorder's office, to be a treasurer's office, to be an engineering office. I don't believe that our position is in land development. So yes, we do have rights, we do have responsibilities in that respect, absolutely. My grandfather was mayor of Winthrop off and on for, I don't know, about 4 decades. And one thing he always said was, okay, there's a house down there that's been vacant for 3 weeks. We can't have this vacancy. We need to encourage people to take advantage of the resources we have. And I believe that the way that we can spur economic development and potentially industry and ideally tourism is to be able to make our costs so much lower. So I'm against this conversation about marrying us with this 501c3 and this nonprofit and that nonprofit. I would rather see us start to step back from those conversations. We're getting our hands into too many conversations. We're getting our hands into too many directions. We have ordinances on the books that we've never enforced. Why have we never enforced them? Because they're duplicitous. The ordinances on the books are the same thing that we have on the state books. We keep saying that we're going to do this, we're going to do that. Well, guess what? These laws are already on the books. We're setting up additional roles and responsibilities for things that already exist. When you talk to the sheriff's office about enforcing this law or enforcing that law, typically they don't go to the ordinance. Typically they go to the state law. So I think we really need to take a step back and say, how much do we really need to invest in wasting all this time and all these resources and all these personnel hours about maintaining something that's already maintained in some other direction?
I've got one final question, and then we'll have a closing statement, and we'll get you guys out of here. So, I was talking to Dawn Vogel, and she was telling me how many committees and boards that she's on as a county supervisor. I guess, are there certain boards, and we'll start with you, Keith. Is there a certain board or committee that you would like to be on if you were elected?
I think that's a real important conversation, because with this EMS council and being an EM manager and conversations like that, we need to take a step back and say, where are we creating conflicts of interest? Where am I creating a rights and responsibility and jurisdiction of a decision that I'm making for myself down the road? I can't have multiple conversations and say, I'm going to elect this rule as a county supervisor, and then I'm going to elect this role as a zoning board chairman. No, we have to start to take a step back. We need to start encouraging younger individuals, more individuals, men, women, children. I mean, obviously we can't have children involved, but we do. We really need to get children involved in politics. We need to start at that grassroots level. And that's why you see me going back to start teaching. I'm in calculus, I'm in shop, I'm in pre-K today. You know, the point of the matter is you don't have to be on every committee, and you especially need to not put yourself into a legal bind. If you're making decisions about a way that you can further make decisions, that's what's called a conflict of interest. You are not supposed to be overseeing yourself.
And I would concur with that point as well. There are a lot of those boards, and I will leave it up to the boards as to who they want and when they want a seat or an opinion, because you got to remember, we're still only, either one of us are still only a one-member board. So there is a decision that has to become into an agreement. We shouldn't be making decisions for these people. I equate it to the clock on the wall. I really do. If you teach me how to tell time, I'm of value to the county. I don't need to know how to build the clock. I will surround myself with the people that know how to build the clock. All you have to do is teach me how to tell time. So by taking that step back, looking at our boards and looking at those people, that's the best thing that we can do, and be there in support if they ask us to be. And the point well taken. We don't need to be micromanagers.
We'll start with you, Rick, with the closing statement.
We have one more question. We have
Well,
one live
great.
from chat.
Okay.
What do you want to read it?
Go ahead, Dale.
Right there in the middle.
Why is there movement afoot to fund additional EMS costs on a county level? Where and how are 911 surcharge monies being allocated or spent? And would the supervisors be in the control of any additional EMS funding by a vote to affirm that plan? I don't know, do you want to look at it to answer it? Or?
I can start with that. Again, you got to look at 911 surcharge money is very specific to the 911 system. It's the call taking device and devices and dispatching and all that, which the sheriff's in charge of all communications. Emergency management, for instance, we talked about it a little bit earlier, can take on some of those responsibilities if the commission so desires to. And our commission hasn't done that in the past along the way. We hope by the time this goes through, if it does go through, we'll be having discussions on that and those decisions that will be made. If it does not go through, we're going to be having harder discussions because there's going to be less service per se along the way, and I don't know how that'll look at the end, especially for the eastern part of the county. We'll have to depend on a contract service as we are now, and if that remains the same, we'll have to figure out where that funding's going to come from, and that will be a decrease in services, quite frankly.
Looks like we have a used car lot on First Avenue West there in Independence that maybe some of those funds could be freed up. It sounds like we've not adequately taken responsibility in the revenues that we've spent already, and that's a responsibility. If Rick gets in the position or if I get in the position, the folks are going to tell us, well, what do they want us to do? And so I think that's real important for the folks to look into this and to ask all the questions, because Rick, are we starting an ambulance service?
We can't make that decision right now. Yeah, don't know.
Okay, because that's the rumors I hear.
We don't know. No, that's not even being discussed. That's some of the options out there.
Actually, it was Dawn who discussed it
No, that's some of the
at the
options out
Jesup
there.
City Council that you were at.
Yeah, that's some of the options out there, but it's not. That decision can't be made until the vote is done. It's got to go to the people.
Were
Absolutely.
you at the meeting with the Jesup City Council?
Yes.
I understand it did not go well with the council. Is that the impression you got, or?
The council was opposed to the full amount that was being asked for, and it was really transmitted very well. They did a good job of playing that out. I would say the EMS association that was there presenting handled themselves very well. I think they did a good job of educating. Again, it's up to the voter and it's up to that city council, those highest elected officials, to be transparent in what they feel, and they did that. So what they did for their community, they based that off of their decision there.
Yeah, well, there's been another meeting, I remind my Jesup listeners, on October 1st. I believe
That is correct.
Yeah.
They're doing the general public ones now. They're
Yeah.
doing the outreach ones.
Yeah, okay, so encourage people to come to see that. So,
Absolutely,
yeah.
and that's what helps us with all of what you do, getting that word out there. The general public needs to be at these. It really affects absolutely everybody, and
Okay.
they need to hear from everybody.
Okay, well, thank you. I got it.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thanks for the listeners.
Yeah.
That's great.
So, would you like to make a closing statement?
Oh, sure.
Yeah, so go ahead.
The good part I'm going to start with, this has been an election again that it puts yourselves out there. I really like the fact of having an election. I've been involved with several that you get into where I don't feel I'm running against anybody. I'm running for myself. So when you keep an election clean like we're doing, having these conversations, these candid conversations, this is what I enjoy about local politics. It really is. Being able to include people, being able to be part of the conversation. I've been honestly very humbled in this election for all the support, and I hope Keith gets the same feeling. With that being said, I hope the voters hear what they want to hear and need to hear from us, and you've got choices. That's the other thing that I love to see. You have choices in community that makes a difference. And we heard it. One of the things that was brought up in Jesup that I will quote, we have the best. We have the best EMS, we have the best fire. And I grew up in 4-H when I could start in 4-H when I was 8 years old. And we had a motto in 4-H, and that was to make the best better. And I feel that's my sincere desire to make county government better. And so any vote, any support is greatly appreciated.
Thank you.
You bet.
Yep, I agree. I think it's been absolutely humbling how much support that we've seen from the community. With people reaching out saying, hey, you can put my sign here. Hey, how do I get your sign? Hey, how do I get more information about you? Absolutely, reach out. You know, that's the point of all this. And it has been great and just absolutely humbling to see all of these people reach out. I think that folks need to make a choice. Do they want to further expand EMS services? Do they want to further expand that budget? Or do we want to take a step back and identify what cost savings do we already have in place? And that is actually on the vote. That is actually on the ballot. You folks need to let us know what you want to happen. If you want someone who's going to continue to expand the budget, you have one choice. If you have another person who says, hey, I think we could start taking some cuts and maybe we can start building some actual reserves. So that seems to be on the budget right here.
Okay.
Okay.
Well, thank you very much. Takes a lot of courage to run, I think.
Yes, sir.
And,
It does.
we appreciate
It
you
does.
doing this.
We
Yeah.
put ourselves out there,
Yeah,
so
yeah,
it definitely does.
Yeah. Okay.
Thanks to Rick and Keith for being on. We'd like to remind our audience to vote in the upcoming election. That's
Please.
got to have numbers out there.
Gotta have numbers.
Yeah. If you'd like to donate to the Steve Brown Arts Center, have an idea for an event, go to the stevebrownartscenter.org and follow the link. Or if you have news or would like to sponsor us, email us at jim@stevebrownartscenter.org or call 319-290-0241 and leave a message. I'm Jim Gillespie with Dale Reber and producer Blake Tempest. As always, thanks to Kelly Seahouse and Cowork 591 for hosting us. Thanks to the audience for bringing these stray dogs into your day, and remember, each day is about little victories.
That's awesome.
Thanks to the audience for bringing these stray dogs into your day, and remember, each day is about little victories.